Sometimes destiny begins with a scream no one else is willing to hear. The rain arrived without warning, turning the narrow mountain road into a ribbon of mud as Leora Ashford pulled the worn gray cloak tighter around her shoulders. At 23 years old, she had already learned that silence hurt less than arguing with people who had decided her worth before she was old enough to speak for herself. Only an hour earlier, beneath the ancient moonstone standing at the center of Moonridge Pack, she had watched another mating ceremony end exactly as every elder expected. One by one, the young alphas had stepped forward to claim the omegas chosen by destiny. One by one, hopeful smiles had filled the gathering. Then the elder had quietly called Leora's name. No alpha moved. The silence that followed felt colder than the autumn rain. Someone laughed. Another whispered the cruel nickname she had carried since childhood. The worthless Omega. The girl whose wolf was too quiet. The orphan who had never belonged anywhere. Leora lowered her eyes, thanked the elders for allowing her to leave, and walked away before pity could become another wound. She did not cry. She had promised herself years ago that she would never give the people who looked down on her the satisfaction of watching her break. The storm grew stronger as she crossed Blackwater Bridge, a weathered wooden crossing that stretched over the widest river in the Northern Kingdom. The current below roared louder than thunder, swollen by days of relentless rain. Most travelers hurried away from the river before darkness fell. Leora intended to do the same until a sound reached her through the wind. It was not the cry of a bird. It was not the howl of a wolf hunting in the mountains. It was a desperate cry filled with pain, fear, and determination all at once. She stopped walking. For a heartbeat, she wondered if the storm had tricked her ears. Then it came again, weaker this time. Without thinking, she ran toward the edge of the bridge and looked down into the violent river below. Something white struggled between broken tree trunks, spinning through the rushing water. At first she believed it was a fallen branch, caught in the current. Another flash of lightning revealed the truth. A massive white wolf fought to keep its head above the water while its swollen belly pressed painfully against the floating timber, trapping one of its hind legs. The wolf was heavily pregnant. Every wave pushed it closer to the jagged rocks farther downstream. Leora searched the empty road behind her. No wagons, no hunters, no guards. No one was coming. Common sense begged her to keep walking. The river was far too dangerous. Even strong alphas avoided crossing it during storms like this. She was only an Omega who had spent her life being told she was too weak to matter. Yet the frightened cry below reached her heart again, and suddenly none of those voices mattered anymore. She spotted an old rescue rope secured beneath the bridge, left there years earlier by fishermen before the floods became too dangerous. Her hands trembled as she untied it and wrapped one end tightly around her waist. She pulled twice to test the knot, whispered a quiet prayer to the moon goddess, and climbed over the slippery railing. Cold rain stung her face. The river crashed against the stone pillars beneath her feet. One deep breath. Then she jumped. The icy water stole every ounce of warmth from her body. The current slammed into her hard enough to steal her breath, dragging her beneath the surface before the rope snapped tight and pulled her back upward. She fought toward the trapped wolf, swallowing fear with every desperate stroke. The animal growled weakly, more frightened than threatening, its silver eyes clouded with exhaustion. Leora spoke softly while cutting away tangled branches with the small knife she always carried for gathering herbs. She did not understand why the wolf gradually stopped struggling, but it seemed to recognize that she meant no harm. One final branch broke free. The wolf slipped loose, only to collapse against her as another wave crashed over them both. Together they drifted toward the riverbank where the rescue rope held just long enough for Leora to drag them through thick mud onto solid ground. She rolled onto her back, gasping beneath the pouring rain. The wolf lay beside her, breathing heavily. Only then did Leora notice the finely crafted silver collar hidden beneath the soaked white fur. Etched into the polished metal was a crescent moon surrounded by 7 stars, a crest she had seen only once before in an old history book inside the village school. It belonged to the royal family of Blackwood. Before she could understand how such a creature had reached the river, the wolf cried out again. This time the sound was different. Its body tightened. Another painful breath escaped its throat. Leora's eyes widened as realization struck her. The wolf was no longer only fighting for its own life. The birth had already begun. Far above the river, almost hidden among rain-soaked cliffs, a lone rider dressed in black reined in his enormous horse and watched the impossible rescue unfold without speaking a single word, his silver eyes never leaving the young Omega kneeling beside the exhausted white wolf. The rain continued through the night as Leora struggled to guide the exhausted white wolf toward her tiny cottage hidden beneath towering pine trees at the edge of Moonridge Forest. Every few steps the magnificent creature faltered, its breathing becoming heavier while another painful wave passed through its body. Leora wrapped her own cloak around the wolf despite the freezing rain soaking her simple dress. She knew the birth could not wait much longer. Her cottage was little more than a single room built from rough timber, filled with bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, shelves crowded with homemade remedies, and a small stone fireplace that had always offered more comfort than luxury. The moment they crossed the doorway, the wolf collapsed onto a thick blanket beside the fire. Leora hurried to light every candle she owned before placing a cast iron kettle above the flames. Fresh water, clean cloth, healing herbs. She moved with surprising confidence, drawing upon everything the elderly village healer had taught her before passing away years earlier. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains while rain hammered against the roof, but inside the little cottage only the crackling fire and the frightened breathing of the wolf remained. Leora knelt beside the great animal and gently rested one trembling hand upon its shoulder. "You are safe now," she whispered. "You only need to keep breathing." The silver eyes watching her slowly softened. Another contraction rippled through the wolf's powerful body, followed by a low cry that carried both pain and determination. Hours seemed to pass as Leora remained beside her, offering calm words even though she had never helped deliver a wolf pup before. She simply trusted kindness more than fear. Finally, just before dawn painted the eastern sky with pale silver light, a tiny white pup entered the world. The little creature released a weak cry before instinctively searching for its mother's warmth. Tears filled Leora's eyes as relief washed over her. "You did it," she whispered with a tired smile. "Both of you." The mother wolf carefully licked her newborn before closing her eyes, utterly exhausted. Leora wrapped another blanket around them and quietly stepped away to prepare warm broth, believing the danger had finally passed. She had barely reached the fireplace when an unfamiliar glow illuminated the room behind her. Startled, she turned. The great white wolf was surrounded by soft silver light that flowed across the wooden floor like moonlight reflected upon calm water. The brilliant glow grew stronger until Leora had to shield her eyes. When the light finally faded, the wolf had disappeared. Resting where the magnificent animal had lain was a graceful woman with long silver hair flowing across the blanket. She wore an elegant white gown embroidered with delicate royal patterns despite having been a wolf only moments before. The newborn pup remained peacefully asleep beside her. Leora stood frozen, unable to speak. Every story she had ever heard about the royal bloodline returned at once. Only the oldest members of the Blackwood family possessed the rare ability to shift between human and wolf forms while retaining complete control of both. The woman slowly opened her silver eyes and looked toward Leora with gentle gratitude. "My child lives because of you," she said weakly. "Thank you." Before Leora could answer, the woman reached for the silver collar resting beside the blanket and placed it around her own wrist like a ceremonial bracelet. The royal crest carved into the polished metal shimmered in the firelight. There could no longer be any doubt. The woman was a member of the royal family. "Who are you?" Leora asked quietly. The woman smiled faintly despite her exhaustion. "Seraphina Blackwood." Leora's breath caught. Every child in the Northern Kingdom knew that name. Seraphina was the Luna Queen, beloved throughout every allied pack and mate to the Alpha King himself. Before either woman could say another word, Seraphina's face suddenly lost its color. She had lost too much strength during the journey and the birth. Her eyes slowly closed as she slipped into unconsciousness. Leora hurried back to her side, checking her breathing and covering her with another blanket. "Please," she whispered, "stay with your little one." A loud pounding exploded against the cottage door before sunrise. The sound echoed through the quiet forest with enough force to rattle the walls. The newborn pup whimpered softly. Leora instinctively stepped between the sleeping child and the entrance. Another heavy knock followed, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of horses gathering outside. Through the small window, she saw dozens of armored riders surrounding her humble home, each carrying polished silver shields marked with the same crescent moon she had seen upon the royal collar. One commanding voice rang out through the morning mist. "Open the door in the name of the crown." Leora drew one slow breath before unlatching the wooden door. The cold morning air rushed inside along with the scent of wet pine and rain-soaked leather. More than 30 royal riders surrounded the little cottage, their silver armor reflecting the pale light of dawn. At their head stood a tall man dressed in a black traveling cloak instead of ceremonial robes. His horse was larger than any Leora had ever seen, standing perfectly still despite the storm. The stranger's silver eyes swept across the cottage before resting on Leora. They were calm, unreadable, and impossibly familiar. "Where is she?" he asked quietly. His voice carried no anger, yet every knight immediately straightened at the sound of it. Leora hesitated only for a moment before stepping aside. "She is alive," she answered honestly. "She and her child are inside." Several soldiers immediately moved forward, but the man lifted one hand. Every knight stopped without question. He entered the cottage alone. His gaze found the unconscious woman beside the fireplace, and then the tiny white pup sleeping peacefully against the blankets. For the first time since arriving, emotion crossed his face. Relief. Deep, overwhelming relief. He knelt beside Serafina and gently brushed a strand of silver hair away from her face before placing 2 fingers against her wrist. Satisfied by her steady pulse, he closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he finally stood again, he turned toward Leora. "Did anyone tell you who she was before you saved her?" he asked. "No," Leora replied. "I only knew she needed help." "Would your decision have changed if you had known she was the Luna Queen?" Leora looked toward the sleeping mother and then at the tiny pup beside her. "No," she answered. "A frightened mother is still a frightened mother. A child about to be born deserves a chance to live no matter whose family they belong to." Silence filled the room. The stranger studied her carefully, as though measuring something that could not be seen with ordinary eyes. Around them, the knights waited without daring to interrupt. Finally, he nodded once. "You risked your own life for people you believed were strangers. That is what anyone should have done," Leora said softly. One of the older commanders stepped forward from the doorway. "Your Majesty, we must return to the capital immediately. The council is already demanding answers." Leora froze. "Your Majesty." The words echoed through the tiny cottage. She slowly lifted her eyes toward the man standing before her. The silver gaze, the quiet authority, the effortless obedience of every knight. There could only be one person they served with such complete loyalty. Alpha King Kalen Blackwood, the ruler of every allied pack in the Northern Kingdom. Leora instinctively lowered her head. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I did not recognize you." "There is nothing to forgive," Kalen replied. "Titles matter very little inside a home where lives have been saved." Before Leora could answer, Serafina suddenly gasped. Her breathing became uneven as faint dark veins appeared beneath the skin of her neck. The royal physician rushed inside after receiving permission from the king. He examined the Luna Queen with increasing concern before looking toward Kalen. "The poison is spreading faster than expected." Leora stared at him. "Poison?" The physician nodded gravely. "The river did not nearly kill her. Someone attempted to assassinate the Luna Queen before she reached the mountains. She escaped, but the poison remained in her blood." Leora's eyes widened. She remembered the unusual color beneath Serafina's fur while cleaning her wounds, but had believed it was only bruising from the river. Kalen noticed the realization on her face. "You saw something," he said quietly. Leora explained everything she had observed while treating the injured wolf, including the strange dark marks surrounding one wound that had not looked natural. The physician listened carefully before asking several detailed questions. His expression slowly changed from uncertainty to surprise. "She recognized the poison before I did," he admitted. "How?" Leora looked embarrassed. "The old healer who raised me always taught that nature leaves patterns. Healthy wounds and poison wounds never breathe the same way." The physician exchanged a thoughtful glance with the king. "She may have saved Her Majesty twice." At that very moment, a sharp cry echoed from the blankets. The newborn pup had awakened. Instead of crawling toward the unconscious Luna Queen, the tiny white wolf slowly stumbled across the blanket until it reached Leora. Without hesitation, it curled against her hand and peacefully fell asleep. Every night in the cottage fell silent. Even the physician stopped moving. The oldest commander whispered almost to himself, "A royal heir has chosen his first guardian." Kalen watched the sleeping pup for a long moment before raising his eyes to Leora once more. "Miss Ashford," he said calmly, "I believe your journey is no longer your own. I must ask you to come with us to Blackwood Citadel. There are questions only you can answer, and I have no intention of allowing the woman who saved my family to face them alone." The journey to Blackwood Citadel lasted 2 days beneath gray autumn skies. Leora rode in a covered carriage beside the royal physician, while the newborn white pup slept peacefully inside a basket lined with soft wool. Serafina remained unconscious in another carriage surrounded by healers who worked without rest to slow the poison spreading through her body. Every few hours, Leora quietly prepared fresh herbal mixtures using plants gathered along the road. Although none of the physicians openly questioned her methods anymore, they watched with growing curiosity each time the Luna Queen's breathing steadied after receiving one of Leora's remedies. The Alpha King rarely spoke during the journey. He rode at the front of the procession with calm confidence, constantly scanning the forests surrounding the narrow mountain roads. More than once, Leora noticed him slowing his horse near her carriage simply to ask the physician one short question. "How is my mate?" The answer was never long. "Still stable, Your Majesty." Each time Kalen nodded once before riding forward again. There were no dramatic speeches, no desperate displays of fear. Yet Leora began to understand that quiet people often carried the deepest worries. Late on the second evening, the towers of Blackwood Citadel appeared above the ancient forest, rising from dark stone cliffs like part of the mountain itself. Hundreds of warm lights glowed through tall windows while banners bearing the silver crescent moon danced in the evening wind. It was more magnificent than anything Leora had imagined. As the gates opened, servants, soldiers, physicians, and royal advisors filled the entrance courtyard. Their relief at seeing the royal procession quickly turned into confusion when they noticed the plainly dressed Omega stepping from one of the carriages carrying the royal heir in her arms. Curious whispers spread immediately. "Who is she? Why is the prince with her? Is she one of the royal healers?" Leora lowered her eyes, uncomfortable beneath so many curious stares. Before uncertainty could grow into open suspicion, Kalen dismounted and walked directly toward her. Without hesitation, he gently lifted the sleeping pup from her arms before turning toward everyone gathered in the courtyard. "This child is alive because of Miss Leora Ashford," he said in a calm voice that carried across the entire courtyard. "The Luna Queen is alive because of Miss Ashford. She is to be treated as an honored guest of Blackwood until I personally say otherwise." The whispers stopped instantly. No one challenged the king's words. Even the proudest nobles bowed their heads. Leora had spent her entire life feeling invisible. Now hundreds of strangers looked at her with respect she had never expected to receive. A middle-aged woman wearing elegant dark blue robes stepped forward from the palace entrance. "Your Majesty," she said, bowing gracefully. "The council has already gathered. They may continue waiting," Kalen replied evenly. "My family comes first." He turned toward Leora. "You have not eaten since yesterday morning." Leora blinked in surprise. She had not realized anyone had noticed. "I am all right." "No," the king answered gently. "You have simply become accustomed to placing yourself last." The quiet observation caught her completely off guard. Before she could respond, an elderly servant approached carrying a warm tray of fresh bread, soup, and tea. "Please," Kalen said. "You cannot continue caring for others while forgetting yourself." It was such a simple kindness that Leora struggled to answer. No alpha had ever spoken to her that way. No one had ever remembered whether she had eaten. As she accepted the tray with quiet thanks, the tiny white pup unexpectedly woke, stretched sleepily, and climbed from the king's arms back toward Leora. The little wolf settled comfortably against her shoulder as though it had chosen its favorite place in the world. Several servants exchanged astonished glances. Royal wolf pups usually remained closest to their parents during the first weeks after birth. The elderly palace steward smiled knowingly, but said nothing. Far above them, hidden behind A balcony overlooking the courtyard. 3 members of the royal council observed the scene in silence. One elderly noble frowned as he watched the young Omega carrying the future heir. A common Omega has no place this close to the throne, he muttered. Another council member folded his hands behind his back. Perhaps not, he replied quietly. But if she truly knows something about the poison that escaped every royal physician, removing her now would raise far too many questions. Their conversation ended as a 4th figure stepped from the shadows. Unlike the others, this man wore no expression at all. His eyes followed Leora until she disappeared inside the palace beside the king. "Keep watching her," he said softly. "If the girl discovers what really happened before the Luna Queen reached that river, everything we have spent years protecting may begin to fall apart." The first morning inside Blackwood Citadel felt strangely peaceful, yet Leora sensed an uneasiness hidden beneath every polished hallway and courteous smile. Servants welcomed her with quiet respect because the Alpha King had spoken in her favor, but many noble guests watched from a distance with carefully concealed suspicion. They did not understand why an unknown Omega from a forgotten pack had suddenly become part of the royal household. Leora understood their confusion better than anyone. She questioned it herself every time she looked through the tall windows overlooking the ancient kingdom. After sharing breakfast with the royal physicians, she immediately asked to visit Serafina. The Luna Queen remained asleep, though her breathing had become steadier overnight. Dr. Rowan stood beside the bed studying several glass bottles filled with dark liquid collected from the poisoned wound. "Your herbs slowed the poison," he admitted. "Nothing in our records explains why." Leora examined the wound once again. The dark veins had faded slightly, yet something continued to trouble her. "This poison was not meant to kill quickly," she whispered. "It was meant to weaken her over time until even experienced healers believed she had simply become ill." Rowan slowly nodded. "That is exactly what happened during the first 3 days." Before either could continue, the tiny white royal pup wandered across the room on uncertain legs. Instead of remaining near the unconscious Luna Queen, he walked directly toward Leora once again and gently rested his head against her ankle. Rowan smiled in quiet disbelief. "Prince Orion has chosen you twice now." Leora carefully lifted the little wolf into her arms. "Perhaps he only remembers the first voice he heard after he was born." "Perhaps," Rowan replied, although his thoughtful expression suggested another possibility. Later that afternoon, while exploring the palace library in search of old medical texts, Leora discovered shelves filled with forgotten journals written by generations of royal healers. Most described familiar illnesses, herbs, and injuries, but one faded leather journal caught her attention because several pages had been carefully removed. Only fragments remained. One surviving sentence immediately drew her eyes. "Compassion weakens what steel cannot wound." Beneath the words, someone had sketched a strange, silver mark resembling intertwined branches surrounding a crescent moon. Leora had never seen the symbol before, yet it stirred an unexpected feeling of recognition. Before she could study it further, footsteps echoed through the quiet library. She quickly closed the journal as Alpha King Kalen entered carrying several old maps. He paused after noticing her. "I did not expect anyone else here. I was looking for information about unusual poisons," Leora answered honestly. "Instead, I found missing pages." Kalen glanced toward the ancient shelf. "Many records disappeared years ago during the reign of my grandfather. Some believed they contained dangerous knowledge. Others believed someone simply wanted history rewritten." He noticed the thoughtful expression on her face. "Did you find anything useful?" Leora hesitated before showing him the remaining page. The king studied the faded drawing carefully. For the first time since they met, genuine surprise crossed his face. "Where did you find this?" "Inside the journal." "This symbol belonged to the Guardian Order," he said quietly. "They were legendary healers who served every pack without asking about bloodline or rank. They disappeared more than 2 centuries ago." "Disappeared," Leora repeated softly. "Or were erased?" Kalen looked at her for several silent seconds before answering. "That question has troubled me since I was a child." Their conversation ended abruptly when one of the palace guards hurried into the library. "Your Majesty, the Royal Council has gathered. They insist the investigation cannot be delayed any longer." Kalen closed the journal himself before returning it carefully to the shelf. Then perhaps today we begin asking the questions that should have been asked long ago. Inside the Grand Council chamber, 12 influential nobles waited around a circular stone table. The atmosphere felt colder than the autumn wind outside. Some greeted the king respectfully. Others immediately shifted their attention toward Leora, standing quietly near the entrance. One elderly council member spoke first. "Your Majesty, before discussing the attack upon the Luna Queen, we must address the presence of this Omega. We know nothing about her family, her loyalty, or how she happened to be alone beside the river at precisely the right moment." Several council members nodded in agreement. Leora remained silent, refusing to defend herself before accusations had even been made. Kaelin slowly looked around the room before speaking. "Then allow me to answer your concern." While dozens of trained warriors searched the forests, Miss Ashford stepped into a flooded river alone to save a life she believed belonged to a stranger. Until someone in this chamber has shown greater courage than that, I suggest we speak of facts instead of suspicion. No one answered immediately. Yet across the table, Lord Cedric Ashbourne lowered his eyes just long enough to hide the flicker of irritation crossing his face. Beneath the polished sleeve of his ceremonial robe, his fingers tightened around a silver ring engraved with the very same forgotten symbol Leora had discovered inside the damaged journal only an hour before. That night the palace refused to sleep. Word of the council meeting spread quietly through every corridor, carried by servants who spoke in whispers and guards who pretended not to notice the growing tension inside Blackwood Citadel. Leora returned to the royal infirmary with Prince Orion sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. The tiny white wolf had become strangely attached to her, always seeming calmer whenever she was nearby. Dr. Rowan smiled as he prepared another infusion. "He trusts your heartbeat," he said softly. "Animals often recognize kindness before people do." Leora gently placed the pup beside his mother. Serafina remained unconscious, yet the dark veins beneath her skin had faded again. Rowan studied the improvement with growing amazement. "Every time you spend time here, the poison weakens a little more." "That cannot be because of me," Leora replied. "I only change her bandages and prepare herbs." Rowan did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached for one of the old journals he had borrowed from the royal archives. Several pages contained faded sketches of forgotten healing traditions practiced centuries earlier. One illustration caught his attention. It showed a healer placing both hands upon an injured wolf, while silver branches surrounded them like gentle light. Beneath the drawing were only a few surviving words because the rest of the page had been deliberately destroyed. "Compassion carries a power no blade can command." Rowan slowly closed the book. "Someone removed the most important pages from nearly every record," he murmured. That was no accident. As midnight approached, Leora finally stepped into the palace gardens to gather fresh moonflowers growing beside a quiet, reflecting pool. The autumn air carried the scent of pine and damp earth, offering a rare moment of peace after the long day. She knelt carefully among the flowers until she sensed another presence nearby. Looking up, she found Alpha King Kaelin standing beneath an ancient oak tree. He was no longer wearing his ceremonial cloak, only a simple dark coat suitable for an evening walk. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply listened to the gentle sound of water flowing through the garden. "You should be resting," Kaelin finally said. Leora smiled. Faintly. "So should you." A quiet laugh escaped him, brief enough that she almost wondered if she had imagined it. "Perhaps we both give better advice than we follow." They walked slowly along the stone path surrounding the pond. Moonlight reflected across the calm water, replacing the memory of the violent river where their paths had first crossed. "When I was a child," Kaelin said, "my mother often brought me here whenever palace life became too loud. She believed silence could reveal truths that arguments never could." Leora looked toward the stars. "The healer who raised me used to say something similar. She believed people always revealed who they truly were when no one expected them to be watched." Kaelin stopped walking. "That explains why you stepped into the river." She looked at him with quiet confusion. "Most people perform brave acts hoping someone will remember them," he continued. "You believed no one would ever know what happened that night. Yet you still chose compassion." Leora lowered her eyes. It did not feel like bravery. It only felt wrong to leave someone behind. Before Kaelin could answer, a sudden chill swept across the garden. The air became unnaturally still. At that same instant, Inside the infirmary, Prince Orion released a frightened cry that echoed through the palace. Leora and Kaelin exchanged one quick glance before running together toward the royal chambers. They found Rowan standing beside Seraphina's bed with alarm written across his face. The dark veins had returned, spreading faster than before despite every remedy they had prepared. The room itself seemed strangely colder. Candles flickered although no windows were open. Rowan looked toward the king. The poison has changed. Leora stepped closer to the bed. Something felt different. The darkness beneath Seraphina's skin no longer resembled ordinary poison. It moved almost like living shadows searching for something. Instinct guided Leora before reason could stop her. She reached for Seraphina's hand. The instant their fingers touched, a wave of icy pain rushed through Leora's body. She gasped and nearly fell, but refused to let go. The dark lines beneath Seraphina's skin began fading once again, while faint silver light shimmered around Leora's hand. Rowan stared in stunned silence. Even Kaelin stepped forward, unable to hide his surprise. After several long seconds, the strange light disappeared. Leora released Seraphina's hand and stumbled backward. Looking down, she froze. A thin silver pattern had appeared across her own wrist, shaped exactly like the intertwined branches she had seen inside the damaged journal. Rowan whispered the words before anyone else could speak. That mark belongs to the Guardians. Kaelin gently steadied Leora before she lost her balance completely. His expression remained calm, yet concern filled his silver eyes. You are trembling. I am all right, she insisted, though her voice sounded weaker than she expected. No, he answered quietly. Something has begun tonight, and I do not believe it is merely an illness anymore. Outside the infirmary, hidden within the darkness of a distant corridor, Lord Cedric watched the silver light fade beneath the closed door. His face slowly hardened. She has awakened the mark, he whispered to himself. If the king learns the entire truth before we silence her, everything our families buried 2 centuries ago will rise again. By sunrise, the entire palace had learned that something impossible had happened inside the royal infirmary. No official announcement had been made, yet whispers traveled faster than royal messengers. Servants quietly spoke of silver light surrounding the unknown Omega. Guards repeated stories about the royal heir refusing to leave her side. Physicians argued in hushed voices over records that insisted such things had disappeared centuries ago. Leora ignored every rumor. Her only concern remained Seraphina, whose breathing had grown stronger after the strange event during the night. Although the silver mark upon Leora's wrist had faded beneath her sleeve, she could still feel a faint warmth beneath her skin whenever she approached the Luna Queen. Dr. Rowan examined both women repeatedly, recording every change with careful precision. The poison is still present, he admitted, but it no longer controls her as it did before. He looked thoughtfully toward Leora. Something interrupted it. Before she could answer, a palace attendant entered the infirmary carrying a sealed invitation bearing the royal crest. His Majesty requests your presence in the Great Hall. Leora exchanged a questioning glance with Rowan. Now, immediately, when she entered the Great Hall, nearly every important noble in the kingdom had already gathered beneath the towering marble columns. Members of the royal council occupied the front seats while military commanders, judges, scholars, and representatives from allied pacts filled the remaining chamber. The atmosphere felt heavy with expectation. At the far end of the hall, Alpha King Kaelin sat upon the black stone throne, though there was nothing theatrical about his presence. He simply watched the room with calm patience until Leora arrived. Miss Ashford, he said, please stand beside me. Murmurs instantly spread across the chamber. Several nobles looked openly displeased. Lord Cedric Ashbourne slowly rose from his chair. Your Majesty, he began respectfully, before this young woman is granted such unusual honor, should we not first determine whether the mark she carries is truly a blessing rather than a danger? Every eye turned toward Leora. She instinctively placed one hand over her sleeve without revealing the silver pattern beneath. Another council member stood. The old records speak of forgotten powers. Forgotten powers often bring forgotten risks. Leora quietly stepped forward before anyone else could speak for her. If my presence places the kingdom in danger, she said calmly, I will leave willingly. I never came seeking privilege. Her words surprised the entire hall. Several nobles had expected tears, anger, or desperate excuses. Instead, they found quiet dignity. Kaelin slowly rose from the throne. That, he said, is precisely why she belongs here today. Lord Cedric frowned. Belongs. The Alpha King descended the wide stone steps, separating the throne from the gathered nobles. When the river flooded, where were our soldiers? Silence. When the Luna Queen fought for her life, who reached her first? No one answered. When every title, every rank, and every privilege meant nothing beside a raging river, one young woman chose compassion over safety. His gaze swept across the chamber. She did not know she was saving a queen. She believed she was saving a stranger. The great hall fell completely silent. At that exact moment, Prince Orion unexpectedly bounded into the chamber, escaping the attendants trying unsuccessfully to catch him. The little white wolf ran directly through rows of astonished nobles before stopping beside Leora. With a happy cry, he placed both tiny front paws against her dress and looked up at her expectantly. Soft laughter spread through part of the hall, while others watched in amazement. Leora knelt and gently lifted the little prince into her arms. Orion immediately rested against her shoulder exactly as he had done since the day of his birth. Suddenly a low hum echoed through the great hall. Every head turned toward the ancient moon altar standing behind the throne. For generations it had remained silent except during royal ceremonies. Now faint silver light flowed across its surface, illuminating symbols that had not been visible for centuries. The light stretched slowly across the polished floor before stopping at Leora's feet. Gasps echoed throughout the chamber. Dr. Rowan stepped forward, unable to hide his astonishment. The altar is responding to the guardian mark. Lord Cedric's calm expression finally cracked. Impossible, he whispered. Kaelin noticed the fear that crossed the nobleman's face. It lasted only an instant, but it was enough. The Alpha King quietly asked the question that changed the entire room. Lord Cedric, why does the return of an ancient healer trouble you more than the attempted murder of your queen? Cedric hesitated for the first time since the meeting began. Before he could answer, Rowan unfolded the damaged journal recovered from the library. Your Majesty, the physician said. While examining the old records, we discovered that several pages had been deliberately removed long ago. Yet one remaining illustration exactly matches the mark that appeared upon Miss Ashford's wrist last night. Kaelin accepted the journal and looked slowly around the chamber. Then it appears our investigation is no longer only about poison. His silver eyes settled upon Cedric once again. It is about the truth someone worked very hard to erase. By sunrise, the entire palace had learned that something impossible had happened inside the royal infirmary. No official announcement had been made, yet whispers traveled faster than royal messengers. Servants quietly spoke of silver light surrounding the unknown Omega. Guards repeated stories about the royal heir refusing to leave her side. Physicians argued in hushed voices over records that insisted such things had disappeared centuries ago. Leora ignored every rumor. Her only concern remained Seraphina, whose breathing had grown stronger after the strange event during the night. Although the silver mark upon Leora's wrist had faded beneath her sleeve, she could still feel a faint warmth beneath her skin whenever she approached the Luna Queen. Dr. Rowan examined both women repeatedly, recording every change with careful precision. The poison is still present, he admitted, but it no longer controls her as it did before. He looked thoughtfully toward Leora. Something interrupted it. Before she could answer, a palace attendant entered the infirmary carrying a sealed invitation bearing the royal crest. His Majesty requests your presence in the Great Hall. Leora exchanged a questioning glance with Rowan. Now, immediately, when she entered the Great Hall, nearly every important noble in the kingdom had already gathered beneath the towering marble columns. Members of the Royal Council occupied the front seats while military commanders, judges, scholars, and representatives from allied pacts filled the remaining chamber. The atmosphere felt heavy with expectation. At the far end of the hall, Alpha King Kaelin sat upon the black stone throne, though there was nothing theatrical about his presence. He simply watched the room with calm patience until Leora arrived. Miss Ashford, he said, please stand beside me. Murmurs instantly spread across the chamber. Several nobles looked openly displeased. Lord Cedric Ashbourne slowly rose from his chair. "Your Majesty," he began respectfully, "before this young woman is granted such unusual honor, should we not first determine whether the mark she carries is truly a blessing rather than a danger?" Every eye turned toward Leora. She instinctively placed one hand over her sleeve without revealing the silver pattern beneath. Another council member stood. "The old records speak of forgotten powers. Forgotten powers often bring forgotten risks." Leora quietly stepped forward before anyone else could speak for her. "If my presence places the kingdom in danger," she said calmly, "I will leave willingly. I never came seeking privilege." Her words surprised the entire hall. Several nobles had expected tears, anger, or desperate excuses. Instead, they found quiet dignity. Kaelin slowly rose from the throne. "That," he said, "is precisely why she belongs here today." Lord Cedric frowned. "Belongs." The Alpha King descended the wide stone steps, separating the throne from the gathered nobles. "When the river flooded, where were our soldiers?" Silence. "When the Luna Queen fought for her life, who reached her first?" No one answered. When every title, every rank, and every privilege meant nothing beside a raging river, one young woman chose compassion over safety. His gaze swept across the chamber. She did not know she was saving a queen. She believed she was saving a stranger. The great hall fell completely silent. At that exact moment, Prince Orion unexpectedly bounded into the chamber, escaping the attendants trying unsuccessfully to catch him. The little white wolf ran directly through rows of astonished nobles before stopping beside Leora. With a happy cry, he placed both tiny front paws against her dress and looked up at her expectantly. Soft laughter spread through part of the hall, while others watched in amazement. Leora knelt and gently lifted the little prince into her arms. Orion immediately rested against her shoulder exactly as he had done since the day of his birth. Suddenly a low hum echoed through the great hall. Every head turned toward the ancient moon altar standing behind the throne. For generations it had remained silent except during royal ceremonies. Now faint silver light flowed across its surface, illuminating symbols that had not been visible for centuries. The light stretched slowly across the polished floor before stopping at Leora's feet. Gasps echoed throughout the chamber. Dr. Rowan stepped forward, unable to hide his astonishment. "The altar is responding to the guardian mark." Lord Cedric's calm expression finally cracked. "Impossible," he whispered. Kaelin noticed the fear that crossed the nobleman's face. It lasted only an instant, but it was enough. The Alpha King quietly asked the question that changed the entire room. "Lord Cedric, why does the return of an ancient healer trouble you more than the attempted murder of your queen?" Cedric hesitated for the first time since the meeting began. Before he could answer, Rowan unfolded the damaged journal recovered from the library. "Your Majesty," the physician said, "while examining the old records, we discovered that several pages had been deliberately removed long ago. Yet one remaining illustration exactly matches the mark that appeared upon Miss Ashford's wrist last night." Kaelin accepted the journal and looked slowly around the chamber. "Then it appears our investigation is no longer only about poison." His silver eyes settled upon Cedric once again. "It is about the truth someone worked very hard to erase." The investigation lasted for several more weeks, though to the people of Blackwood it seemed as if the kingdom itself had begun awakening from a long-forgotten dream. Hidden chambers beneath the Eastern Sanctuary were opened for the first time in nearly 200 years. Dust-covered scrolls, sealed royal decrees, and forgotten journals revealed a history far different from the one taught in every noble household. The Guardians had never betrayed the crown. They had protected it. When plague, famine, and war threatened the Northern Kingdom generations earlier, the Guardians had willingly sacrificed their own lives to save thousands. Their reward had not been honor. It had been fear. Certain ambitious nobles had begun believing that any power beyond their control endangered their influence. Piece by piece, records were destroyed. Statues disappeared. Names were erased. Survivors were hunted until the Guardian Order faded into legend. Every document pointed toward the same conspiracy, and every trail eventually reached the ancestors of Lord Cedric Ashbourne. Faced with undeniable evidence, Cedric finally confessed before the Royal Council. His family had preserved the deception for generations, fearing that the return of a true guardian would expose the crimes upon which much of their influence had been built. Even the poison that nearly claimed Queen Seraphina's life had been created by those determined to keep the ancient secret buried forever. Justice came quietly. There were no celebrations, no cries for revenge, and no public executions. Kaelin believed that a kingdom healed by truth should not immediately stain itself with needless cruelty. Cedric and those who knowingly protected the conspiracy surrendered their titles and were sentenced according to the laws they had manipulated for so many years. When the council finally adjourned, many nobles remained seated long after the hall had emptied, humbled by how much of their own history they had never truly known. Outside, life slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm. Queen Seraphina recovered her strength with each passing day, while little Prince Orion grew into an energetic white wolf who spent far more time following Leora through palace gardens than remaining inside the royal nursery. Servants often laughed whenever they found the future heir helping Leora gather herbs or falling asleep beside her while she prepared medicines for injured travelers. She never treated him differently because he was a prince. To her, he was simply a curious child who loved chasing butterflies and asking endless questions about flowers. That ordinary kindness became one of the greatest lessons the palace had ever witnessed. One quiet evening, as autumn slowly surrendered to winter, Kaelin found Leora standing upon the western balcony overlooking the forests beyond Blackwood Citadel. Snowflakes drifted gently through the evening air, covering the mountains in silver light. For several peaceful moments, neither of them spoke. They had learned that silence shared between trusted hearts rarely felt empty. "The kingdom has changed because of you," Kaelin said at last. Leora shook her head with a small smile. "The kingdom changed because people finally chose to see the truth. And who reminded us how to look?" She could not answer that. Instead, she watched the first stars appear above the snow-covered peaks. After a long pause, Kaelin reached into his coat and removed a small wooden box carved with the same intertwined branches that had appeared upon her wrist weeks earlier. Inside rested a simple silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon embraced by flowering vines. It held no jewels and no extravagant decorations. Its beauty came from what it represented rather than what it cost. "This belonged to the last guardian ever officially recognized by the crown," Kaelin said softly. "For 2 centuries no one worthy remained to receive it." Leora looked at the pendant but did not immediately accept it. "I do not wish to become important because of a symbol." Kaelin smiled gently. "That is precisely why it belongs to you." With quiet hands, she accepted the pendant. The silver mark beneath her sleeve warmed gently before fading completely, leaving behind only smooth skin. Rowan, who had studied the ancient journals more carefully than anyone else, later explained that the mark had never been meant to remain forever. It appeared only long enough to awaken the calling already living within the heart. Months later, Blackwood celebrated the first festival of compassion in its history. Instead of honoring victories won through battle, the festival celebrated healers, teachers, guardians, farmers, and ordinary people whose quiet acts of kindness held the kingdom together every day. New laws opened the royal academies to every gifted healer regardless of bloodline, rank, or pack. The Guardian Order was restored, not as an army, but as a fellowship devoted to protecting life wherever suffering appeared. On the morning of the ceremony, thousands gathered before the ancient throne. Many expected Queen Seraphina to place a jeweled crown upon Leora's head. Others believed the Alpha King would publicly declare her his Luna before the assembled kingdom. Neither happened. Instead, Kaelin carried a simple wooden chair onto the platform himself and placed it beside the ancient throne. The crowd watched in puzzled silence. "Power," he said, his voice carrying across the great courtyard, "has ruled from this throne for generations." He rested one hand upon the second chair. "Today, compassion receives its own place beside it." He turned toward Leora, not with command, but with invitation. "Will you walk beside me?" Leora looked across the countless faces before her. She remembered the lonely bridge, the roaring river, the frightened cry that everyone else had been too far away to hear. She remembered believing no one would ever know what she had done that stormy night. She had never imagined that one quiet choice would lead her here. Slowly she stepped forward and sat beside the king, not above anyone, and not beneath anyone, but beside him. Queen Seraphina smiled through grateful tears. Little Orion ran across the platform and climbed into Leora's lap as laughter spread warmly through the crowd. The bells of Blackwood rang together across the valley while snow continued falling softly from the winter sky. Long after those who had lived through those remarkable days were gone, storytellers would remember many great kings, fearless warriors, and powerful queens. Yet the legend told most often beside winter fires was never about a throne. It was about an orphaned Omega who heard one frightened cry above the sound of a raging river, and proved that the gentlest heart could carry the greatest strength of all.